Hey everyone, welcome back for another deep dive with us.
Glad to be here.
This time we're going to be looking at Galatians 3 and 4.
Okay.
So these chapters are really interesting because they dive deep into this whole question of faith versus law and what it means to be a child of God.
Yeah.
And the way they're framed, it almost feels like a wake-up call.
It is, isn't it?
Why?
Yeah, I mean, right off the bat in Galatians 3.1,
Yeah.
Paul just throws out this really intense question.
Oh, okay.
Who has bewitched you?
Wow, he doesn't hold back.
Not at all. It's like he can't believe what he's hearing from the Galatians.
So what's going on that would make Paul react so strongly?
Well, a lot of the early Christians were Jewish,
Right.
and some were saying that you had to follow Jewish law to be saved.
Even after accepting Christ.
Yeah, even after accepting Christ.
So they're mixing two different belief systems.
Exactly, and it's causing all this confusion,
Yeah.
all this tension in these early Christian communities. And Paul is basically saying, no, you're missing the point.
Okay.
Your relationship with God is about faith, not a list of rules.
Faith, not a checklist.
Right. He even brings up Abraham,
Okay.
points out that Abraham was seen as righteous because of his belief,
Long before the law came along.
way before the law was even given to Moses.
Interesting. So it's like Paul saying, hey, faith, that's the original way.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It has that, old school authenticity to it.
I like that.
And he really hammers that home in Galatians 3.6.
Okay.
Abraham believed God, and that was it.
Yeah.
God saw his faith.
Right.
He wasn't declared righteous because he was perfectly following all these rules.
It was his faith that mattered.
Exactly. And Paul's making it clear that it's the same for us today.
That's a good reminder.
Faith is what really counts.
Okay, so this brings us to Galatians 3.13.
Yeah.
It talks about Christ redeeming us from the curse of the law.
It's a powerful verse.
It is, but honestly, sometimes I read verses like that and I'm like, wait, what does that actually mean?
Sure.
So break it down for me. What is the curse of the law?
That's a great question, and it's really important to understand that because it gets to the heart of what Paul's trying to say.
Okay.
The curse isn't the law itself.
Okay.
It's what happens when we can't perfectly fulfill it.
Oh, I see.
That feeling of never quite measuring up, always falling short,
Yeah.
which leads to, separation from God.
That makes sense.
Like you're trying to climb a mountain,
Yeah.
but you've got this backpack full of rocks.
Oh, okay.
You're weighed down, struggling to get to the top.
Okay, so Christ takes that heavy backpack off.
Yes. He takes on the burden of the law,
Wow.
the weight of our shortcomings, so we don't have to.
So we don't have to carry it anymore.
He becomes the curse for us so that we can be free.
That's a pretty incredible idea when you think about it.
It is.
This gift of freedom, but sometimes I think we still hold on to those old backpacks, you know?
It's true. We get stuck in that mindset of earning our way.
Yeah.
And that's exactly why Paul's message is like this wake-up call.
Yeah.
He's saying, let go of the burden.
Mm.
Embrace the freedom Christ is giving you.
It's not just about being free from the law.
Right.
It's about being free to become something new.
Exactly. Free to become children of God.
That's powerful. And that whole transformation from slave to son or daughter,
Yeah,
that's a big part of chapter 4.
it is.
There's this line in Galatians 4.7, so you are no longer a slave but a son, and if a son, then an heir through God.
Inheritance.
Such an important concept.
Yeah, it's not just about forgiveness, is it?
No, it goes much deeper than that.
Okay, so to really understand this, we have to think about adoption in Roman culture.
Right. Yeah, back then, an adopted son, they had all the same rights and privileges as a biological son.
Really?
They were completely part of the family,
Wow.
fully entitled to inherit everything.
So Paul is saying we're not just forgiven, we're fully accepted, loved. Yes. And given this incredible inheritance.
It's a complete status change.
It is. It's like being adopted into royalty.
Wow, I like that. And Paul doesn't stop there.
Right.
To explain this even more, he uses this analogy from the Old Testament.
The story of Hagar and Sarah.
Okay, remind me, how does that connect to this idea of law versus grace?
So Paul uses Hagar, who was a slave,
Yeah.
to represent life under the law.
Oh, okay.
It's that constant striving.
Trying to earn your way in.
Yeah, trying to earn God's favor.
Gotcha.
But then you have Sarah, who represents the freedom of being a child of promise.
Okay, so she embodies this idea of being loved and accepted just as we are.
Exactly. Not because of what we do, but because of who we are.
So it's like Paul's presenting us with two paths, two different ways of relating to God.
Right. Two very different ways of living.
It makes you think, which one resonates more with you?
It really does. Are we living like Hagar, striving and struggling?
Or are we embracing the freedom of being a Sarah, resting in the knowledge that we're already loved and accepted as God's children?
It's a question worth pondering.
Yeah.
And it all goes back to that idea of a wake-up call.
Paul's not just interested in theoretical theology.
Not at all. He wants us to look at our lives,
Yeah.
really examine our hearts and ask, are we truly living as the children of God that we are?
That's a good place to leave it for now. So we've explored freedom from the law, being adopted as sons and daughters, but what does that look like in our lives? How does this change our relationship with God, with ourselves, even with the world around us? That's something to think about. We'll dive into all that in the next part of our deep dive.
Okay, so we're no longer bound by the law.
Right.
We have this incredible freedom
Yeah.
as children of God.
Yeah.
But freedom can be kind of daunting, can it?
It can be.
It's like, okay, I'm free now, what?
That's a good point.
How do we actually live this out?
Yeah, that's a question a lot of people struggle with.
It's one thing to grasp the ideas, but how do we actually put them into practice in our everyday lives?
Give me the how-to guide.
Okay, well, I think first and foremost, it means letting go of that need to prove ourselves.
Okay.
It's about recognizing that we're loved and accepted just as we are.
Yeah.
We don't have to earn God's favor
Right.
through our actions or achievements.
Yeah.
His love is a free gift,
It is.
and nothing we do can change that.
That's a good reminder because it's easy to fall into that trap of thinking our worth is tied to what we accomplish.
Especially in today's world.
Yeah.
You know, it's all about do more, be more, achieve more. It is.
But that's where grace comes in, right?
Absolutely.
Grace is this idea that we receive God's love not because we deserve it,
Right.
but just because he chooses to give it to us.
It's pretty radical.
It is when you think about it.
Yeah, it completely changes how we see our relationship with God.
I love that you bring up grace because it's this undeserved gift.
Yeah.
You know, you can never fully grasp it.
It's hard to wrap your head around it.
Yeah. Yeah. But it has the power to transform us.
Absolutely.
And this transformation from striving to resting,
Yeah,
that's really the heart of what it means to live as a child of God, right?
I completely agree.
It's not about I have to, it's about I get to.
Exactly.
It's embracing the truth that we're loved, accepted, forgiven,
Yeah,
and letting that truth shape our thoughts, our actions, our relationships.
it affects everything.
So instead of always trying to earn God's love,
Yeah,
we can actually rest in it.
right.
Let it flow through us.
Become conduits of his grace.
Yeah, and extend that same love and acceptance to others.
Exactly. And that's where things start to get really interesting.
Okay, I like where this is going.
Because when we truly understand this freedom,
Yeah.
it changes not only our relationship with God,
Yeah.
it impacts how we interact with the world around us.
Okay, I'm curious. Tell me more about that. How does this freedom affect how we treat other people?
Well, I don't think it necessarily means we become perfect overnight,
Right.
but it gives us a new perspective. We recognize our own need for grace.
Yeah.
So we become more compassionate towards others,
That makes sense.
less judgmental.
Yeah.
Because we realize that everyone is on their own journey,
Yeah.
you know?
We all have our own stuff.
Yeah, we all have our own burdens.
It's like that saying, hurt people hurt people.
It's true.
If we're weighed down by our insecurities and the need to prove ourselves,
Yeah.
we project that onto others.
We do.
But when we experience God's grace,
Mm-hmm.
it breaks that cycle.
Yeah.
And we can approach people with more empathy.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's about extending that same grace to others,
Yeah.
creating a space where people feel safe to be themselves, flaws and all.
I love that, just safe to be themselves, knowing they're accepted and loved no matter what.
Exactly.
That's amazing. We become like walking embodiments of grace,
That's a good way to put it.
radiating God's love wherever we go.
It's not just about our personal relationships either.
Right. It affects how we see our work, our community, even the tough times in life.
It does. When we see ourselves as God's children, chosen and loved, it gives us this sense of purpose,
Yeah.
a dignity that goes beyond anything this world can offer.
So it's less about chasing success and more about being a reflection of God's love.
Yeah, even in the everyday stuff,
It's a whole new way of thinking about work, isn't it?
it changes everything.
What about when things get tough?
Yeah.
Does this freedom mean we don't go through hard times?
Of course not. We still live in a broken world.
Right.
We're going to face challenges,
Mhm.
difficulties.
Yeah.
But grace gives us a new way to look at it.
Oh, okay, how so?
It helps us see those struggles not as punishments,
Okay.
but as opportunities to grow.
So it's not why me, it's what is God trying to teach me through this,
Exactly. It's a
right?
subtle shift in thinking,
It is.
but it makes a huge difference.
It does. And, it's in those hard times that our true identity as God's kids can really shine.
Yeah, because when we're stripped of everything else,
Yeah.
when we have to face our own weakness, we can experience God's love and grace in a whole new way.
It's like we discover a strength we didn't even know we had.
Resilience.
Yeah, and that strength doesn't come from us. It comes from knowing that we're loved and supported by God.
Right, by a God who was always there,
He never leaves us.
even in the darkest times.
That is comforting. And this understanding of freedom and grace,
Yeah.
it doesn't protect us from pain,
Right.
but it gives us what we need to get through it.
Exactly. The strength to endure.
Yeah,
The courage to face challenges head on.
knowing we're not alone.
That we're loved and cared for by a God who will never leave our side.
I love that. And it's a good point to pause and reflect on everything we've talked about.
Okay.
We've covered a lot about this freedom we have as God's children,
Yeah.
how it transforms our relationship with Him, and how it changes the way we interact with the world.
That affects everything.
But there's one more piece of this puzzle we need to look at,
Okay.
and that's the idea of living as children of promise.
Yeah, that's a big one.
That's at the core of Paul's message in Galatians.
Absolutely.
So that's what we'll explore in the final part of this deep dive. We've talked about freedom from the law and this whole idea of becoming sons and daughters.
Right.
But Paul keeps going back to this children of promise thing in Galatians.
Yeah.
What's that all about? Why is it so important?
It's a really key theme,
Mm.
and it kind of ties everything together, you know?
Okay.
Faith, freedom, inheritance.
Yeah.
When Paul calls us children of promise, he's taking us straight back to Abraham.
Go back to Abraham.
Remember, Abraham believed God's promise that he'd have tons of descendants, even when it seemed impossible.
Yeah, like more descendants than stars in the sky.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it was that belief, that trust in God's promise that made him righteous.
It wasn't about keeping all the rules perfectly.
Right. It was about holding on to that promise even when things looked bleak.
So that's the legacy we get as children of promise.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's not just about being related to Abraham physically.
Okay.
It's about inheriting that same faith,
I see.
that same willingness to believe in God's promises, even when we don't get it or see how it could ever happen.
So we're called to live with that same kind of trust.
Yeah, that radical trust.
Like a bold expectation that God will do what He said.
Exactly. Even if it seems impossible.
Wow, that's a tall order sometimes.
It is a call to radical faith.
It's not always easy, is it?
Definitely not.
Yeah.
We face stuff that makes us question God's promises, just like Abraham did.
Yeah.
But that's where faith is really tested. You know,
Okay.
choosing to believe even when we don't see the proof, when things around us seem to contradict what God has promised.
It makes me think about all the times I've doubted, wondered if God was really going to come through.
Yeah.
It's actually kind of comforting knowing that even Abraham, this giant of faith, had moments of doubt.
It's so human to doubt.
Yeah, I guess it is.
And in those moments of wrestling, that's actually when our faith can grow stronger.
Okay, so it's not blind faith. It's about choosing to trust even when it's hard.
Exactly, even when it doesn't make sense.
And that trust, that belief in God's promises, that's what sets us free.
Yes, it frees us from trying to control everything, from that fear of the unknown, from the anxiety of trying to make things happen on our own.
Makes sense.
Because when we truly believe that God is in control, that He's working everything out for good,
Yeah.
it allows us to let go of the burden and just rest in His plan.
And that leads to peace, freedom.
It does. It's a surrender that brings real freedom.
So this children of promise idea, it's not just some theoretical thing.
Right.
It's a call to action.
Yeah, it's a challenge to live our lives trusting that God will keep His promises.
And that's what sets us free to experience the life He has for us.
It's a beautiful paradox.
Oh, okay.
In surrendering to God's will, in trusting His promises even when we don't understand them.
Yeah,
That's where we find true freedom.
that's powerful. And that freedom lets us live boldly, love deeply, make a difference in the world that reflects God's heart.
It does.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into Galatians 3 and 4, I want to leave you with this. You are a child of promise. God has chosen you. He loves you, and He has an amazing plan for your life.
A plan bigger than you can imagine.
Trust Him, believe in His promises, and live each day knowing that He is working everything out for your good.
And as you do that, as you step into who you are as God's child, you'll find a joy and a peace that nothing can take away.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time.